inform the development of capability here in New Zealand. As a government agency, it partners with a range of businesses of all sizes to help develop capability in New Zealand, largely focused on those high value activities, particularly around innovation, research and development and the like. So by way of background, this is the role for Callaghan and why Callaghan Innovation felt this was such an important project to run. It also identified the opportunity of working with a range of businesses, and that by developing through this industry, Callaghan plays a role alongside many other government agencies, CRIs and other organisations to help build business innovation, business capability and an understanding of business capability and what's required to succeed. So that was some of the background and some of the reason for why Callaghan got involved with this project. So what's been done? Back in February, March, just pre-COVID, the project started, and it was to look at capability roadmaps across medicinal, hemp seed as a food, beverage or body care product, and also in the fibre space as well. And in each of those three areas, it was an opportunity to show and highlight the development of capabilities in those areas, what currently existed, and also the opportunity to build that as we move forward and successfully build this industry. I have the privilege of being able to share with you today just some of that roadmap. It's obviously very detailed, but just to illustrate how it was formed and the importance of it in providing that structure and also that direction for participants in the sector. It highlights what would be required to succeed and help support any business who is looking to grow, whether it be as a niche operator or across the value chain. Capabilities are also expressed across the value chain and recognise all the way from seed to sale the importance of developing and building on those capabilities in the sector. So I'm pleased to be able to provide or present the hemp seed capability roadmap. This is one of three roadmaps that we have developed and it's something that we've been worked hard on, has actually had widespread and gained significant stakeholder feedback over the last few months to help inform this. And it really sets out what is the capability that's required to succeed in this industry. This is a roadmap that will help you navigate not only what are the key questions that you should be asking, but also who you can seek support from in the sector as well. And I'll talk through that all the way from seed to market. So taking this through, first of all, it highlights the importance that to be successful in this industry, you need to develop the right strategy for you and your business. And that's looking at business strategy, R&D and IP strategy, and also regulatory and market access and the strategy which is important there to help inform how your business will grow and compete in this market. And this is where it starts, and it's also important, and it recognised these are core capabilities that are important regardless of not only the industry, but also regardless of the business you're looking to operate. And then, to bring it together, we have the overall capability roadmap. Now, this is informed by a number of stakeholders already operating in New Zealand and also informed by other wide-ranging insight, but looks at all capabilities which exist from seed through to sale, as well as those core capabilities which are important along the value chain. Highlighting what's important about the capability that needs to be built to succeed, who to ask, who to partner with, and the questions you should ask, and those capability providers, as I mentioned earlier. This is the culmination of a significant amount of work. And if I can take it a little bit further, just to dive into one of these capability areas and give you an idea just what value it can provide everyone in the sector. Under R&D IP strategy, for example, it's really important that right from the start you identify this and develop the strategy that's right for your business. There are a couple of key questions are asked around development, leveraging and managing and protecting IP as you grow and develop your business here in New Zealand. And this gives you a really clear signpost as to how you can achieve that as well. Moving through, It also highlights in more detail, what are the key questions you should ask yourself? Do I have the right business strategy in place? Is it aligned to my IP strategy? Have I identified those different sources of IP, all the way through to then identifying who you can talk to more about accessing capability to help build your business? So this is something which, as a walkthrough, I've shared with you today. And I'm very excited to say that we're very close to having roadmaps available across medicinal cannabis, across hemp seed as a food, beverage and body care product, and across fibre as well. So that's 3 roadmaps to help give this industry and participants and key players within it the right tools to succeed as well. Next steps, as I mentioned, is we're looking to have these available in July, and we really encourage the feedback from across the industry as well, recognising that this will grow as the industry grows as well. So just one part of saying that even in this immediate term, there's an opportunity as capability builds to find more information and help your business to succeed and help ask those questions of who can provide support out there in the industry. Thank you.
Great stuff. Thank you, Andrew. That was a really interesting presentation, and it's so wonderful that Callaghan's involved, because they're a big part of joining industry with the government. And so to have these roadmaps, which was an aim from the 2018 summit to develop these roadmaps, is a very very useful tool. And they're very iterative, aren't they? They're going to be used again and again and updated, and more content added as the industry develops, because we're talking about some very broad areas. You mentioned the food one, for example, that could easily be split into those nutritious hemp foods plus the body care products and all that sort of thing. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how all those documents evolve, and I'm sure they're going to be of great use to the industry as we get going.
Thank you. Okay,
Shane, over to Shane, and we'll hear from Shane now.
Right, well, thank you very much. So for a bit of background on myself, I started MCAN's, a patient-led charity, about 5 years ago now, advocating for legal access. So I've kind of become a bit of a self-taught expert on the regulatory and the regime side of things here in New Zealand. But for everyone starting out in the hemp industry, I thought it worthwhile to just start with some basic terminology on how cannabis interacts with hemp and how that will affect the hemp licenses versus the cannabis side of things going forward. So first of all, if we're going to go through, there's only 10 minutes, so I'm just going to cover off lightly on a few subjects. And one is the basic anatomy of what's actually worthwhile in the cannabis plant for medicinal purposes. And then we'll go into the compounds, the cannabinoids, terpenes, the actual system in the body that this interacts with. Some of the nuances on what's called the entourage effect of how the system works, and why cannabis is better as a crude extract as opposed to a refined medicinal product. And then if we have time, I'll touch lightly on the regulations as well. So first of all, hemp, while grown in large crops, when you're trying to grow for seed, you have a mix of male and female plants. When we're trying to grow it for medicinal purposes, it's all about unfertilized female flowers. So much so that if this Canterbury Plains was turned into hemp crops, you'd probably want your medicinal crops to be indoors in airtight facilities to stop any of that pollen, which can travel for 10 kilometers or more, from ruining your crops. So the male plants are basically worthless from a medicinal point of view. And even in the female plants, the medicinal value is mostly in the flowers. There are trace amounts of cannabinoids in the leaves, and there are companies overseas that will process the leaves and everything to get every last drop out of it. But if you're doing low scale extractions, you want to just use high value products. You don't want to be putting in tons and tons of leaves with a fraction of a percentage yield coming out of them. In other countries, there's actually some really interesting laws around this side of things. In Japan, you're allowed CBD as a product on the shelf, but it's not allowed to come from the flowers or the leaves. It has to come from stick and stem. So basically it's commercially unviable, and the companies have been lying about how they're sourcing their CBD in Japan, and some of them have been caught red-handed by their Ministry of Health equivalent and been punished for it. The other parts of the plant basically have nothing. There's a bit of an urban myth in New Zealand that you can actually get useful cannabinoids out of the roots. That's not true. But in saying that, there is actually 1 or 2 other compounds that's found in the roots of the hemp plant that may have anti-inflammatory properties. So the bit of the female flower we're all about actually is the trichomes. So this is what gives cannabis flowers their really crystally or shiny look to them. So basically, in the medicinal world, the hemp plant with its genetics is engineered towards seed production or fiber production. But for medicinal crops, all of the genetics and everything needs to be orientated towards resin production. So resin is produced in these trichomes, which actually have antibacterial and anti-pest properties. So some of them are actually antifungal and that sort of thing, which would actually help plants in the wild stop going moldy before they can be fertilized and generate seeds. But generally, once the female flowers are fertilized, all of the energy production goes into seed. So they actually become fairly worthless once they've got seeds in them. So the next thing is the actual active ingredients we're all about. And in the context of cannabis, it's all about the cannabinoids, and there's actually several ways you can obtain them. So we have phytocannabinoids, which are from the plant. And the interesting thing there is some of the cannabinoids can be found in other plants, but not in usable quantities that's really been commercially harvested. There is a bit of talk of CBG being found in a few species in trace amounts. There are other species that have completely different sets of cannabinoids that aren't found in the cannabis plant, but they haven't been commercialized. Then we have the endocannabinoids or endogenous ones. Those are the ones that are naturally occurring within the body. The favorite one that everyone likes to cite is something called anandamide, which is Sanskrit for bliss. And anandamide is the closest natural equivalent to THC that's in the body. And people have actually targeted that to get around the illegality of cannabis and trying to make drugs that would stop the destruction of anandamide in the blood and that sort of thing to boost your cannabis levels naturally. The other ones are, of course, synthetic, which we've had a bit of a scourge in New Zealand, but it's very important to separate synthetic cannabinoids, that's just, making the same ones that are found in cannabis in the lab, versus some of these other classes of drugs that don't even work like cannabinoids but have a cannabinoid-like effect. So these synthetic cannabimimetics, as they're called, they're the ones that have been around in New Zealand that were showing 80 times more influence on the body per molecule, and then having a whole lot more of them in much higher doses than what people were getting on the black market. So the synthetic cannabinoids, the original ones, were actually fairly mild, and they were generated and created so that you could get around THC being illegal and allowed you to get on with doing some research on lab rats and that sorts of thing. But the latest wave of drugs are completely different again. And it's also important to note that some of these cannabinoids, the cost of synthetics are coming down, and they will end up being more affordable potentially than products derived from the plant. So synthetic CBD, for example, because the demand is so high, it's not quite there yet, but they are scaling up production, and it's foreseeable in future that you'll be competing with synthetic CBD products if we allowed hemp CBD to become an over-the-counter medicine. So on the cannabinoids front, there's over 100 of them, but there's only about a half dozen that have got usable amounts that have been well researched. Our favorite one is THC, or tetrahydrocannabinol. That's the one that gets you high, but it also has really strong effects for nausea and vomiting. So it's quite useful for chemotherapy. It also reduces the eye pressure for glaucoma patients. However, it's only a fleeting response, and there are much better drugs for that treatment now. It's also good for antispastic properties in multiple sclerosis. And while the evidence hasn't gone to fully phase 3, $10 million trials, it's showing a lot of promise for other movement conditions as well, such as in New Zealand, our severe Tourette's patients have had a really sterling response with THC containing cannabis products. The next one is cannabidiol, or CBD, and that's the one where all the hype is at the moment. And there's a bit of to and fro on where that should actually belong, because it's so safe and it's not psychotropic. It won't get you high. And in fact, it actually helps block THC from getting you high. So cannabidiol has got good research for epilepsy, specifically 2 really rare treatment-resistant forms of epilepsy, Dravet syndrome and Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. And we talk about the epileptic kids for these conditions, and that's because the lethality of the conditions is so high that there's a good chunk of patients with these conditions who don't make it to adulthood. And cannabidiol is also anti-anxiety, so it has anxiolytic properties. So a lot of people find low doses of CBD fairly effective for just managing day-to-day levels of anxiety. But in really high doses, astronomically unaffordable doses, the clinical data suggests it's even really good for bringing schizophrenic patients out of psychosis. So that's quite important leading into the referendum. People talk about schizophrenia and, you know, THC might be making it worse, but actually the antidote is within the plant itself as well. So another one that doesn't have any products in New Zealand yet, but is being commercialized overseas is cannabinol, or CBN. And CBN is actually just degraded THC. So if you had a whole bunch of pure THC and you left it in the sunlight, in a jar in the sun for 6 months or so, the UV radiation will break a lot of that down to CBN. CBN, it's still psychoactive, but it doesn't seem to be as euphoric as THC. It's not as pleasant, but it is far more sedative. And because cannabinoids are fairly safe, it may be a useful treatment longer term for sleep disorders. The next one is cannabigerol, or CBG, and that's considered the stem cell cannabinoid. And CBG is the main one that you'll find in cannabis plants before they've aged, CBG is then converted either into THC or CBD. So there's a lot of hemp products coming out overseas now that use CBG. And that's just to get around this whole argument over whether CBD is illegal or not. They're just taking it one step back further in poorly regulated environments. The last three there, cannabidivarin, tetrahydrocannabivarin, and cannabichromine, they are more trace amount type compounds. However, there are a couple of specimens that have been found to be really high in CBDV and THCV, which is those first two. So if you ever stumbled across a strain of hemp and you sent it off to ESR for testing and they came back with a strong reading of CBDV or THCV, you should really let someone know, because those are quite rare at the moment, and that's probably where the money will be for extracts in future as we go towards the rarer stuff. So the next set of compounds in the cannabis plant are the terpenes, and those are the ones that give cannabis varieties their different smells and flavors. But they actually have some useful effects themselves. And this does touch a little bit into some of that aromatherapy stuff where they're using compounds and making bold claims on trace amounts. But in the cannabis context, there are one or two that are really key and do have a significant influence. So myrcene, which is the one on the far right. Myrcene is the dominant terpene in most cannabis varieties, and that's the one that dictates how sedative a cannabis variety will be. So some high THC cannabis varieties will send you to sleep, or give you couch lock as they call it. And those generally have more than 1% myrcene by weight, but the ones that are under that are generally not sedating. So there's some, what used to be attributed as sativa tropical varieties of cannabis that were a bit taller and had a few less nodes on them. It actually seems to be more the terpenes that matter than the plant variety. Some of the others that are important are limonene. And limonene has a really useful attribute in that it helps skin absorption for lipophilic compounds, and cannabinoids are a group of those compounds. So in future, while limonene varieties might have a nice pleasant smell to them, in future it may be that for when people are making topical hemp products or topical cannabis products, they might deliberately select a limonene variety for improved absorption and making the product more effective. Finally, touching on the endocannabinoid system, this is the reason cannabis works for various conditions. So just as we have an opioid system with, I think, 4 different opioid receptors that respond to the morphine class of drugs, we have 2 receptors that are well known that respond to cannabinoids. And the interesting thing is CB1, which is the one that THC interacts with, which gets you high, while it's found very densely in the brain, it's not found densely in the brain stem. So you can't overdose on it and have your breathing suppressed so you overdose like you would on morphine. And that's a really useful trait for cannabis, is that you can't practically overdose yourself to death like you can with other drugs. So the top 3 classes of drugs for overdose in New Zealand are opioids, benzodiazepines, and then the sedatives to help with sleep, mainly zopiclone. So while cannabis can help with pain and it can help with anxiety and it can help with sleep, the safety profile is pretty stellar on it compared to those other drugs and an outright mortality risk. But counter to that, the evidence of efficacy is just not there for most conditions at the moment. So while there's a group of CB1 and CB2, which are the main ones we understand, I've listed a few others here you can look at, but they are poorly understood at the moment. And there's still emerging research to be done on the various effects of things. So the endocannabinoid system doesn't seem to directly influence one set of systems in the body, but behind the scenes, it pulls the levers on a whole bunch of conditions. So while THC is good for anxiety and appetite and nausea and pain and spasticity, you know, there's no other class of drugs that can do that sort of thing all in one go. The other interesting thing about this endocannabinoid system is the entourage effect. And that is THC by itself is unpleasant. It's really prone to causing anxiety and psychosis, but a little bit of CBD in there makes it far more appealing. And actually in the clinical products we have in New Zealand, practically all of them have CBD in a decent amount. And that seems to counteract most of the negative effects of THC. So unlike opium, where you can do an extract and turn it into codeine or morphine, with cannabis, it's better as a cruder extract that has components of the full plant extract. So and a good example of that would be CBD in epilepsy. There's an animal study where basically CBD by itself worked up to a point and then stopped, but when they used a crude extract, the efficacy for inflammation of the knee, it just kept going up and up, so long as it was a full extract with the other compounds. The other example is in epilepsy. Epidiolex is a pure CBD pharmaceutical product that's now FDA approved, and it's got really bad toxicity effects interacting with some of the other anti-epileptic drugs that risk liver injury. But going from that pure CBD to 1 part THC to 50 parts CBD, that appears to have the dose needed for the same efficacy in epilepsy. And the other products that are more common in Colorado, the Charlotte's Web and Haley's Hope hemp type products, they are typically in the 1 to 20 to 1 to 25 strength of THC to CBD. And anecdotally, it appears that on average, parents in Colorado are dosing their kids with about 1/8 as much CBD as the pure pharmaceutical CBD products. So touching on psychoactivity, so I've got a nice handy chart here talking about the spectrum of effects, and that starts from the pure THC, as I alluded to, being quite psychoactive, but the more CBD you add into it, the more tolerable the effects become. It improves your memory, the muscle control and motor delay, they all get improved. But it doesn't seem to reduce the positive effects on pain relief, spasticity, appetite stimulation, and that sort of thing. So in that context, clinically, it's pretty hard to justify using a really, really high THC product with no CBD in it. And that's why in the prescription regime, there's going to be a big emphasis on CBD, even if THC is needed. It's going to be all about reducing the negative effects. So that's the short and sweet of the terminology on cannabis. And I'll leave it back to you, Richard.
Okay, so if you can come off your screen share then, Shane, lovely. Thank you very much for that. Now, thank you for taking us on that deep dive into the medicinal side. It was an important part of today's conversation because that's probably where the most terminology is. From the New Zealand Hemp Industries Association's point of view, we look at the hemp industry as having sort of 4 cornerstones, being the growers that underpin everything that we do, and the need for varieties for them to grow better quality products and things. And then the 3 other sections are the food, fibre and health. So they're very important sections that we have, but the food industry is quite well developed. You know, people have been producing food for quite some time. The fibre industry, because of this decortication step requiring the processing of the stems, is going to be underway, and we'll touch on that in a later episode when we talk about decortication and construction uses of industrial hemp. But the medicinal one is quite new, and that's a subset for us of the wider health industry. So to understand some of the constituents in the plant, the 520 odd phytocannabinoids, terpenes and flavonoids in the leaf and the flowering top, helps us to put that into context, because they all have health benefits. And at the moment, we're limited to just the medicinal use of those. So we'll be discussing some of that with the regulator tomorrow, but again, it will be a theme throughout. And it seems to be, and most of the attendees on the call will know about CBD, but that's one of the biggest potential markets for industrial hemp as well, which is witnessed by the change in the US when the Farm Bill 2018 came in and allowed them to grow industrial hemp and use it in that health space. And it's just been a massive increase in the hectares being produced in the States, because everybody's been attracted to that side of the industry due to the cash flow. You know, it's a lot easier to make the money in that. So that comes with problems as well, because big money attracts the sharks. So it's you know, you've got to be watching that quality as well. So we'll come back to some of those topics in a moment, but I just wanted to make my apologies, because we began the introduction and I see in the chat there was lots of problems with hearing the quality of the sound. I've changed the modem now, so that should be resolved. But unfortunately, when I went into my presentation in the introduction, I thought I'd hit record, but I must have hit it, but maybe hit it twice because it wasn't recording. So unfortunately, this recording will be starting a little bit into Andrew's presentation. My apologies to all the viewers that are watching right now, thinking that they were having a full episode. It was just a brief introduction that they've missed, so it shouldn't matter too much to the content, but we can move on now. It's just fascinating to see how we can get this industry moving forward, and really, you know, since 2006 it's been stagnated by the fact that we didn't have a major market, and that changed of course in 2018 when we gained access to the hemp seed food market. That said, at the same time we lost access to the secondary market, which was our animal food industry. So we've got issues there that we're working through with the Ministry of Primary Industries and the Agricultural Veterinary Medicines team. And hopefully all of these things will be resolved in a very short time. You know, when we talk in short terms, we should consider that it took nearly 18 years for us to get hemp seed foods across the line. The first application to Australia New Zealand Food Safety Authority went in 1998. So it does take some time to get things done in our industry as far as the regulators go, but they have been very, very busy in the recent past getting the medicinal side set up, and of course the referendum, which was talked about, thank you Shane, in the last presentation. So with regard to the referendum, the New Zealand hemp industries have an AGM on the 11th of July, and that referendum will be discussed, because we have a remit on the AGM's agenda to say whether or not we support the referendum. Now, of course, the referendum is going to be something that individuals will vote on, but does it support the industry? And well, does the hemp industry support the referendum? So in a sense, one of the questions that came up was very pertinent into this space. So I'm just going to bring up this question from Floyd, who asks, would we be able to grow hemp at home if there was a yes vote? And that's an interesting question, Floyd, for the sense of, I think the regulations that they're proposing to, you know, the bill they're voting on would allow you to grow a small number of plants, maybe 2 plants. So could they be industrial hemp? Well, yes, I guess they could, unless you have to have a license to grow industrial hemp, in which case then maybe not. So there's a bit of a blurring of the lines there, and this is why the New Zealand Hemp Industries Association has one of their objectives is that we acknowledge the recreational industry, but we have no interest in it unless it impacts on our industrial hemp regulations. Now, clearly a comment like that can impact on our regulations, so it will be something that we'll have to have a look at and take a stand on, and hopefully the referendum will vote, and we'll see what the outcome is after that. But just to again elucidate that this is a long-term project. I mean, to get CBD moved around in this space, it's a political question, because there's nothing necessarily to do with safety, because it's already proven to be very safe. The World Health Organization's acknowledged that it's non-addictive, it's very safe at even reasonably large dosage. So it becomes a question on what is an appropriate dose across the types of products that you want to make out of CBD derived from industrial hemp. So is it in a food and beverage, or a balm, or some other sort of cosmetic or natural health product? all the way up to the medicinal side of that spectrum, where you've got the higher dosage from a medicinal use. But and there's plenty of companies, of course.
Richard, can I cut in and give them
yes,
some
please.
examples? Yeah. So on the CBD front, I'm also on the board for the industry body. So we've already done a bit of work on how we can get CBD more readily accessible. So looking overseas, South Africa has decided that doses up to 20 milligrams a day cut out of their Medicines Act entirely if they are accompanied with low risk health claims. That is, they're marketed like vitamins and supplements. However, South Africa's medicines law basically allows the minister to exempt anything from anything within the law via a gazette notice or an update. So that's very third world and giving the minister total power to basically do away with the rule book. But it's quite handy in the context of CBD. In Australia, there is a review underway to make doses up to 16 milligrams a day in 1 month packs, pushing them down from prescription only to pharmacist only. But that's still very much in the medicine space where it needs to be made under GMP and all of that sort of thing, which is, you know, a 7 or 8 figure proposition realistically. In Britain, they have just announced that Epidiolex, which is actually made in the UK, but because it's got the research data to back it as an effective product as well, and its safety profile, they've pushed that down to pharmacist only as a product, but not as CBD as a category. So that's the perks of them being local and them being the first in the pharmaceutical space. They've got a huge amount of money behind them. Now, in the New Zealand context, there's the Medicines Classification Committee, and CBD is a scheduled medicine. So to get that down and out, we've looked at it, but the Medicines Act doesn't allow them, it doesn't give the committee the power to kick a product out of the Medicines Act entirely. So we'd actually need to have low-dose consented products like the UK has. But the problem there is if we're targeting low doses because they're safe, low doses are also less effective, so it's harder to get the product registered as a medicine to go through that process to push it down to pharmacist only, pharmacy only, or general sale, which is you know, gas stations and supermarkets. So we've actually been told it needs a political solution. One of the other things Australia has that we don't is a natural health products bill. So there's a whole lot of compounds that are actually scheduled medicines but are occurring naturally in plants. And to have an intermediate solution where it's not a medicine, but it's not a food, so a fortified supplements like your CBD tinctures and that sort of thing, it really needs a natural health products bill. And the government has, or the ministry has said that's on the radar after the therapeutic products regulation. So we're talking 6 years plus just to have a chance of getting it. So realistically, if we're looking at over-the-counter CBD products, the best hope in the short term is the referendum.
Yes, for moving things forward, and this is a frustrating thing from the hemp industry because, of course, them being the Ministry of Health and the regulators under the Medicines Act classifying CBD as a prescription medicine, there's no acknowledgement that this is a naturally occurring product in our hemp that we can't take out. So our balms and our things made from the leaf and the flowering tops will contain this, and it just becomes a nightmare for them to enforce. And you know, there's already, you know, we're seeing issues with imported products because they don't have to have the same quality standards. So you've got a regulator holding our local medicinal industry to a very, very high standard. But is it doing anything about these imported products as far as their quality goes? So these are very interesting questions that we'll have to get to the bottom of. But it's showing the potential because from our hemp industry point of view, again, looking at medicine as a subset of health, there's a lot of people in that natural health products, food and beverage, cosmetic industries that are all looking for these sort of new ingredients to incorporate into their products. So there's quite a lot of industry will to get this done. Will that translate to political will? Well, in Australia, as you described, I mean, the senators all got up in arms because they were being contacted by a whole lot of people wanting this to happen. And they got some studies done and the studies backed up what they suggested they should do, and it's moving forward. Now, our food policy is dedicated, you know, decided by Australia, really, because our Australian New Zealand Food Safety Authority has 9 votes in Australia and 1 vote in New Zealand. So, you know, if they move forward, then that could help us as well. And the worldwide, we need to have these understandings around what the right dose and pack size and those sort of things are for a range of products, from food all the way through, food and beverage, all the way through to that medicinal side. So a fascinating topic, and thank you, Shane, for giving us that insight, because I think people on the call will be very interested to hear a bit more about this particular topic, because it's something that could cash flow the industry a lot quicker. But if we go back to the general questions, and we look at Andrew and say, thank you very much, Andrew, about the value chain. Was there any other interesting things that you found, Andrew, when you were interviewing all the leaders of industry and people involved? Were they coming up with things that were looking exciting on the horizon, or they were, you know, is there gaps in the value chain? Because I would have thought that the growing would be, once we get that going, once there's a demand, you know, that would be quite straightforward. But you know, if you're a farmer, you really need to make sure that you know what you're doing, in the sense of having a market for your product and being able to, you know, get that across the line. For example, a farmer that's producing a food grade product needs to be EP01 registered with a food, with MPI food. So, you know, to make a food grade product, they also need to be able to get their seed off the plant and into a dryer very, very quickly to keep the quality up. So we have a lot of farmers that are really interested. You know, I get an email quite often, you know, I want to grow industrial hemp, it sounds really good. But how many people are really taking the deep dive to learn about what they need to know before they, and try and identify their role in the value chain?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Richard. And, you know, in some ways, the purpose of the capability roadmap was to start addressing some of those questions, you know, both in terms of allowing the business owner to look further through the value chain, to look at what the end market would look like and what would be required to be successful there. So one of the observations I saw was the ability to actually, you know, be more joined up as an industry, you know, to actually enable those conversations. So at every stage of the value chain, we always have in mind what the end product is going to be, and actually gear our organisations, our businesses to that. That was one observation. Many times I heard the opportunity for that to develop as the industry develops. The second point would be the opportunity for much wider collaboration, both with government agencies and across the industry more generally. There was a real opportunity, and I mentioned right back at the start, that was really the start point for this project. And I have been left very clear in my mind that the opportunity for the industry moving forward is, how do we enable that? How do we allow for, you know, small or larger ecosystems, but also within that, you know, a number of collaborative groups to exist and help drive a much more innovative industry, to help ensure that we're meeting the needs of the marketplace, both domestically and as an export market opportunities as they play out as well. All of those require a really important fundamental way of looking at it. And in fact, that was our first thought when it came to developing that roadmap, is making sure we start that conversation. So one of the other benefits, I believe, of starting to look at what capabilities are important is it's also trying to identify what are the collaborations that are going to be important to succeed here, and also having the end in mind always when it comes to building your business.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And that word collaboration, I mean, you know, this is 80 years of prohibition, a brand new industry that we have in New Zealand. We have the opportunity to start as we mean to go on, and really working together. The wine industry is an example of that, where they collaborate when they go international, but everybody knows it's a form of co-opetition, because they are actually in competition. But there's, you know, to scale properly, we need to be able to be working together to achieve some of those requirements, to even, you know, supply into some of those offshore markets. And this whole supply demand situation has got to be something that we really have to look at and try and manage, because if we have a Canadian situation where everybody, you know, in 1998 they started growing industrial hemp and they went straight into the human food market. Interestingly enough, they didn't have the animal food at all. It was a bit of a standing joke that we were exactly opposite. But they had a boom and bust cycle where they had a lot of farmers go in, grow a lot of seed, and the price came down. The farmers, you know, didn't want to weren't required to produce the next year, so they lost interest. So if we can manage that scaling by matching our supply and demand as these markets grow, then we can really assist the industry to do that. And I think you're right. The opportunities for industrial hemp to be a catalyst for joining up the government, to join up MPI and all the, you know, there's 25 plus touch points in MPI about industrial hemp, from the agricultural compounds, veterinary medicines people across the spectrum to the more the trade orientated. So there's huge numbers of people that are very, very interested in this topic. So we're hoping that you know, it can join the New Zealand trade enterprise all the way through to MIMBI, back towards MPI and MOH. And of course, clusters around regions of speciality as well, which you see in the wine industry quite regularly, don't you? I mean, there's various regions in the wine industry that have really good quality wines. And that would be the same in the hemp. And then we've got this other layer on top, and Shane mentioned it as well, around pollen. So you'd be probably having regions that specialise in feminized plants, as opposed to, especially if they're growing outside, whereas other more broadacre areas would do that arable cropping for the fibre and the seed. And then of course there's the whole genetics around wanting better quality yields, for example, of seed, or there might be some specification from a fibre point of view that requires a fibre plant to be grown in a certain way, to be harvested in a certain way, to be retted, which is a term that we talk about when field retting is where you leave the stems on the field and let the dew and the microbes in the atmosphere break it down. And that could last sort of, you know, you might have to leave that on for 6 weeks. And then lift it off and go to a decorticator. Now, a lot of farmers might go, well, I want my follow-on crop to go in a lot quicker than that, because I want to harvest and get my winter feed crop in very, very fast. So, you know, people understanding how it fits into their scheme, you know, their farming scheme and their rotation, because it is a wonderful alternate land use, because we've talked about seed, fibre and health, but I mean, there's also the phytoremediation benefits of growing industrial hemp to cleanse and condition soil. So it's a great one for rotation, but how does it fit in that rotation? And these are the studies that we need. This is a science that we'd all benefit from, and it's very important that we get Sustainable Food and Fibre Futures Fund and things like that involved to help fund some of this green fields or foundation knowledge. And that benefits the whole industry. So we should be able to see collaboration in that as well. And then, as I say, these regional clusters around expertise in food or health products or fibre products. And some of that will come down to, you know, where a decorticator goes in for a fibre industry. Because, of course, each decorticator, you know, depending on how much you're going to spend, requires, you know, needs 100 hectares or 1,000 hectares around that decorticator. Because you can't move this product. Freight would just kill you. So the processing and the value add has to be done locally. And that's the beauty of the regional development part of where it happens, because this is a crop grown in the regions, added value in the regions, processed and manufactured. So these are all economic opportunities, because that leads to investment in the regions and of course, job creations and opportunity for training. And so that touches on now the economic potential, and this will be built up throughout the webinar series in July, and the final document that we're leading towards will give us a really good indication of the potential for the industry to become $1 billion industry, but in the sense of, you know, similar to wine and kiwi fruit, but we can do it a lot faster. And it's such a long-reaching process. It feels, for people coming into the industry, in a way, it feels all, oh man, I've got to get in there and do something, you know. So it feels like a sprint, but actually it's a marathon. And people will say to me, oh, but America's going ahead, but they're facing similar issues to us, and we can catch up very, very fast, because we have Kiwi ingenuity, we have a good, solid set of scientific people around, you know, Crown Research Institutes, all the universities are engaged with this product. You know, it's a great raw material to get started with. So it's a wonderful opportunity. But I guess I should, because I've just gone on a little bit too long there, I should thank our panellists, Andrew and Shane. Thank you very much for your time and making yourselves available and presenting such wonderful information. It was really, really well done. And I'm sure our viewers enjoyed it. I'd like to thank the attendees that did attend today, because without you guys, there would be no point. And I'm hoping that the word spreads and we can get to quite a big number by the end of the month. And of course, this is all leading to our Industrial Hemp Summit and Expo in Aotearoa in May 2021. So I'd like to invite you all and look forward to seeing you and welcoming you to that summit, because that will be the physical summit where we can do this Q&A, but there's also that networking opportunity to really work on those clusters. So thank you very much for your time, everybody, and I hope it was of value. And we look forward to the following one tomorrow, which is our government regulation and testing. So we'll look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Richard.
Thank you, Richard.
You guys.